Thank you very much, panelists, for joining this very important session, Innovations in Vaccine Space. In fact, the pandemic has made us, realize and witness the unprecedented innovations that have been achieved, I think, in less than 21 months, not only in science, research, and technology, but also in financing mechanisms and regulatory mechanisms, as also in collaborations, partnerships, and tech transfers. Also leading to supply chain, and therefore making sure that we have the accessibility, availability, and affordability of the vaccines at large scale. So, today I have a galaxy of stars of speakers with me, and they're coming from different backgrounds, representing different constituencies, and I'm sure, ladies and gentlemen, you will benefit tremendously with this great panel today we have in front of you. So what I would do is to start with, because the focus has been Africa. So we wanted to start with Dr. John, but I think he has not yet taken the seat here. So what I would do is to start with Dr. Keriasa Atin, the director PAHO, and would request her to please take the lead and take us to what PAHO has been doing in this pandemic and how it has been supporting millions of people worldwide. Over to you, Dr. Atin.
Thank you very much, and good morning. And well, it's good morning here, good afternoon, good night. Let me begin by thanking you for inviting me to this, the 2021 meeting of the Developing Countries Vaccine Manufacturers Network. So, colleagues, we are now 20 months into the COVID-19 pandemic that has reached every corner of this earth and has so greatly affected the region of the Americas. The Americas has been the epicenter of this pandemic, with more than 2 million deaths, and as of last week, the Americas had reported 39% and 46% of the global COVID-19 cases and deaths respectively. 5 of our countries in the region are within the 10 top countries in the world with the highest number of cumulative deaths. In the Americas, this pandemic has wreaked havoc on the economies and societies of our people in our countries. So last week, we issued the second joint policy brief with the Economic Commission of Latin America and the Caribbean on, and let me quote, the prolongation of the health crisis and its impact on the health, the economy, and social development. You've asked me to speak about PAHO's role in pandemics, and I by extension, epidemics and disasters. But interestingly, it was the need to control the spread of epidemics from one country to the other, as well as the protection of countries' economies, which led in the first place to the creation in December 1902 of what is today the Pan American Health Organization. And so epidemics and pandemics remains a founding principle of PAHO, which is enshrined in its constitution. We remain committed to ensuring that all people have access to the healthcare they need when they need it, with quality, without fear of falling into poverty in normal times, in disease outbreaks, and beyond. Our region is very well practiced in dealing with epidemics. So over the last decade, our region has been affected by epidemics of cholera, dengue, yellow fever, chikungunya, Zika, and the 2009 H1N1 pandemic influenza. In addition to infectious hazards, our region is unfortunately prone to natural disasters. The recent major hurricanes in the Caribbean and the US, images of the explosive eruption of La Soufrière in St. Vincent in April of this year, and the devastation of the earthquake in South Haiti just 2 months ago, emblematic of the region of the Americas, and are certainly still vivid for many of us. So what are some of the things that we have done? The organization has promoted and supported member states to develop a multi-hazard approach to health emergency preparedness, developing a health sector multi-hazard response framework, which remains current today, especially so during the COVID-19 emergency. The PAHO emergency program has functioned for more than 40 years in this region. In health emergencies, the resilience of health systems is a critical factor in our ability to save lives, an overarching goal in any response. So we have the Safe Hospitals and the Smart Hospitals initiative implemented jointly with countries and territories in the Americas, and this has contributed to ensure that hundreds of healthcare facilities remain accessible and functional at maximum capacity during disasters or epidemics. Over the last 10 to 15 years, PAHO, working with countries and the United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, we have together developed what is a strong network of sentinel surveillance for influenza and other respiratory viruses. The SARI-NET network provides a critical platform for collaboration among professionals from ministries of health, reference laboratories, sentinel hospitals, and partner institutions that share experiences and define the best practice to characterize and reduce the morbidity and mortality of influenza and other respiratory viruses in the Americas. SARI-NET has also greatly contributed to the global influenza surveillance and response system. We have also collaborated closely for decades with all member states to develop effective national immunization programs, trustworthy national regulatory agencies, and reliable planning and supply mechanisms for routine vaccines of proven quality through the PAHO's over 40-year-old revolving fund for access to affordable and effective vaccines. It's not enough just to produce vaccines. You have to be able to get them into the patient's arms or mouth. So just as in the times of our founding in 1902, we played a central role in the regional response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Tracking, analyzing, and forecasting epidemiological trends is key to an effective response. PAHO sent the first regional epi alert on the novel coronavirus on the 16th of January 2020 to all our member states. And since then, we have published some 34 COVID-19 epi updates and alerts. We have supplied our countries and territories with over 29 million reaction tests, provided critical support through the PAHO COVID-19 genomic surveillance regional network to monitor the emergence of variants throughout our region. We worked and continue working with countries to surge health services, increasing ICU capacity across countries by more than 80%, supporting the generation of much needed oxygen and monitoring the capacity of essential health services. The already existing network of public health laboratories for influenza and other respiratory viruses was leveraged at the beginning of the COVID pandemic in January 2020 to introduce the molecular testing for the new pathogen throughout the region. Through training, quality control, and purchase and distribution of essential laboratory supplies that was provided by PAHO, and that was done by the third week of February 2020, all countries and territories in the Americas had the capacity or the access to confirm SARS-CoV-2 by February of 2020, the third week. As early as March 2020, we initiated a regional initiative to develop capacities in the same laboratories for molecular sequencing of SARS-CoV-2. So today, these early investments in sequencing capacities allows us to know where SARS-CoV-2 variants are and how their distribution changes over time. We are continuing to work with member states on workforce development and utilization, emergency medical teams deployment, and the protection of essential health workers who continue to place their lives on the line to save others. We are also generating and updating clinical guidelines and critically assessing and disseminating the best evidence for health interventions and the use of medicines and health technologies. We have pursued the effort to strengthen national regulatory authorities to ensure the quality and safety of medicines, vaccines, and health technologies, while at the same time facilitating the rapid deployment of critical new technologies such as antigen diagnostics and COVID-19 vaccines. We've held 30 or more workshops with our regulatory authorities, having already established this network, the PAHO network on national drug regulatory authorities. We have worked through the kovacs facility and bilaterally with countries such as the United States, France, Sweden, and Spain to secure much needed vaccine donations for our PAHO member states. And we are currently finalizing negotiations with manufacturers to secure supplies through the PAHO revolving fund for delivery in the final quarter of 2021 and throughout 2022. So to date, more than 1 billion COVID-19 vaccine doses have been administered in our region. 35% of people in Latin America and the Caribbean have been fully vaccinated against COVID-19. But you will agree with me that this is not enough. Access to COVID-19 vaccines across countries and territories of the region of the Americas reflects the reality of global scarcity and remains highly inequitable. And this is the immediate challenge that we face now, addressing the terrible inequity in access to life-saving vaccines between rich and poor countries and between countries that are lucky enough to host a vaccine manufacturer or having the resources to purchase vaccines bilaterally. And that is why this meeting is also very important. So looking forward, while we address the immediate challenges of COVID-19, we must begin the work to address the root causes and our shortcomings so that future generations are better prepared. So I have tasked our organization and including our member states that we take action to build on the innovation that has enabled our member states to respond, to accelerate recovery and rebuild smartly. So looking into the future, first we must invest in the transformation of health systems, to build inclusive, adaptive, and resilient health systems based on primary health care. Second, we must expand regional production for essential medicines, vaccines, and health technology within the region. So with WHO, we have launched, and we are WHO too, but we have launched a regional platform to bring partners together and to facilitate the technology transfer across the region with the active engagement of health, science, and technology, and the industry itself. And third, I have challenged us to scale capacity and technical support to our member states in health and the economy, in addressing the social and environmental determinants of health, and in the One Health strategy. Our region, during the last 2 years and even before, has relied heavily on PAHO for leadership in health. And we will continue to provide that leadership, and jointly with WHO and our member states, we will work night and day to support countries in bringing an end to this pandemic. We look to networks such as yours, the DCVMN, to partner with us in emergency times and beyond, because it is only through that collective action that we will bring this pandemic under control and realize the vision that was of our founding countries 119 years ago. So let me thank you again for inviting me, and may I wish you well in all of your deliberations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dain. It was excellent talk, and we are deeply impressed with the foresightedness, preparedness, and resilience, expertise, and experience of PAHO in dealing with several, natural or man-made disasters, and coming up with your strategy of investing in transformation, expanding the regional, production capacity through tech transfers, and scaling the capacity in health and economy, and also looking forward to work together with the DCVMN and IFMA partners to make sure that billions of people are able to get the required doses, not only in Latin America or Americas, but also globally. So thank you very much once again for your very thoughtful deliberation. So with this, I think what I would do is to invite Ms. Aurelia, the Managing Director, kovacs facility, for her talk on, on 2021 and beyond. So Aurelia, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rajinder. Can you hear me?
Yes, very clear.
Great, thank you. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all. It's a real pleasure to be with you. Thank you very much for the invitation to join you today. Maybe if I can have my slides up, please. And before I turn to my remarks on the kovacs facility, I just wanted to take a moment just to really acknowledge and appreciate the contributions that many of you in this meeting are making towards the development, the manufacture, and the implementation of COVID-19 vaccines. And many of you are already essential partners in the work that Gavi does in terms of all life-saving routine vaccines for the world's poorest. But now, of course, with COVID, you've also taken an important step. And I think 50% of the COVID-19 vaccines are currently coming from the DCVMN network. So I just really wanted to appreciate that. Maybe just a couple of thoughts in terms of our experience so far. The kovacs facility and our partners, CEPI, UNICEF, WHO, have met or exceeded a number of our key targets, mostly on fundraising and on the numbers of manufacturer candidates that we've secured. And foundationally, this is really important because when we start to plan for 2022 and beyond, we want to make sure that we have this strong foundation, but we can only be successful if those deals and the money that we've raised really translate into shots in arms, and particularly with the priority populations having access globally. And so at the moment, we're scaling deliveries every week and working to bridge what is still a really important equity gap between countries. So a key challenge for us has been our ability to access doses despite the large portfolio of deals that we've had. We've had very strong headwinds in terms of export bans, delays in manufacturing, ramp up regulatory approvals, pre-commitments of bilateral deals. And so that's made our supply very, very challenging. And we're taking steps to mitigate and address these supply gaps with dose donations, with making sure that we have manufacturer task force look at supplier constraints, and really looking to make way for a ground of diversified and resilient supply base. So let me now turn just to a brief introduction on the kovacs facility that I think many of you are familiar with the very simple premise that it is looking to match, on the one hand, participants where we can pool demand and financing, which consolidates the buying power and provides participants with a broad and actively managed portfolio. And then on the other hand, yourselves as the manufacturers, where we can have access to pooled supply and provide manufacturers with access to a massive and demand assured market. Next slide, please. So the objective that we had for 2021 to end the acute phase of the pandemic by guaranteeing fair and equitable access to COVID-19's, making sure we gave a compelling return on investment by delivering the vaccines as quickly as possible, supporting a large and actively managed portfolio of vaccines, and delivering 2 billion doses by end of 2021. Next slide, please. And so we measure our progress against these objectives with these 6 key metrics. So the first metric that we have is funding. We have raised $10.9 billion for the COVAX Advanced Market Commitment, so looking after the low and lower middle income countries, against our target of $9.3 billion. We have had the 10.1 billion that's earmarked for vaccines on the one hand, as well as 0.8 billion for delivery funding. The next two metrics relate to the COVAX vaccine portfolio. So as I mentioned, we've signed agreements with 11 vaccine candidates. We had a target of 10. We expect to have available for release from manufacturers 1.4 billion doses in 2021 based on our signed agreements. That's against our target of 2 billion. And that also includes an estimate of the numbers of doses that we have from dose sharing, so dose donations. And then the next two metrics are around our delivery targets. We've had 94%, pardon me, of COVAX participants that have received first shipment of doses against our target of 100%. And of the 587 million doses we have allocated to date, we've delivered 355 million, and that will rapidly scale up still towards the end of the year. And then finally, just a contextual measure to note that we have over 3.5 billion people that are vaccinated against COVID-19 with at least one dose, and that's from all sources. Next slide. Again, so let me take the opportunity of being with you for your annual general meeting, just again to thank you for your significant contribution. Around 50% of the COVID-19 vaccine deliveries are coming from the DCVMN network, as is shown on this slide, while manufacturing of routine vaccines has been maintained. And I really want to emphasize that that is an important condition in terms of making sure that routine immunization production does not suffer from the massive scale up that's required for COVID-19 vaccines. So just wanted to highlight this and also ask on my and our behalf of the partner organizations just to recognize your organizations for the tremendous work that's gone on here. Next slide, please. So I want to touch a little bit on the key challenges that are facing COVAX and some of the mitigation plans. First is the inequity in distribution. Secondly, supply disruptions, and third, delivery risk. So I've already discussed, I think, the inequity issue. So I will focus on the next one around the focus on manufacturing and supply. Next slide, please. This is our global supply forecast that is publicly made available, where you can see the supply of vaccines coming through COVAX. We have three scenarios. This is the most likely scenario, and as it breaks down across our participants between advanced market country participants and self-financing participants. So the low and lower middle income country participants and the upper middle income and high income country participants. Of the 1.4 doses that are to be released from manufacturers by the end of 2021, about 1.2 of those are for the AMC participants. So that's through COVAX funded doses, the dose donations, and cost share doses. So the cost share mechanism allows countries to use their domestic funding, which includes funding for multilateral development banks, to support additional procurement on top of what they will have through donor funding through the COVAX AMC. And so across the 91 AMC participants, so not counting India, that is an equivalent to about 20% population coverage, which would be equivalent to about 40% of the adult population. Next slide, please. We've had an evolving landscape, as I've mentioned, and a number of supply issues. And so this is just an illustration in terms of, as we looked through two different points in time, the forecast we had in July versus the one in September, that there was a deterioration in anticipated volumes of about 25%. And you can see here, there's a range of different causes for supply delays across different products. And in some instances, it's a combination of different issues. But I think those are important for us to be very active in terms of addressing, and of course, relying on your support to help do so as well. Next slide, please. Just a word to say that dose donations, or dose sharing as we call it, have been an important a part in terms of bridging between the manufacturer commitments and deliveries. So over 1 billion doses have been pledged, as you can see here on the chart so far, with an expectation that we will have about 400 million of those doses delivered to AMC countries before the end of 2021. Next slide. And then, as you may have heard in the plenary, an important other aspect that is has been established by kovacs has been the manufacturing task force. This was established in the spring with a view to identify and address the critical sources of both a short and term supply, but also medium and long-term supply. So CEPI has led some important work in terms of looking at access to critical inputs and obstacles like trade barriers to the flow of goods, and setting up a marketplace to be able to match suppliers of inputs with the manufacturers who need them. So an important development for increasing short-term supply. Next slide, please. And then also working very closely within the manufacturing task force with the World Trade Organization in terms of identifying and advocating for countries to take steps to eliminate trade, custom, and other barriers to the flow of goods, really with a view of optimizing all of the supply that we're able to leverage at the moment. And then a couple of last slides on my side, just to look forward in terms of the strategic priorities for 2022 and beyond. If I can have the next slide, please. And then again. So as we continue to focus on ending the acute phase of this pandemic, we anticipate having the doses to do so. And we're also looking ahead to 2022 and how kovacs can best support the country's needs and ambitions that they have to control the disease and to reopen their societies. So we are aligning to the WHO's global coverage goals, really with a view to provide vaccines to help countries meet the coverage targets that they set for themselves, and supporting their investments in delivery systems that both address the need for COVID while continuing to protect the needs for routine immunization. So kovacs will support a portfolio of effective and affordable vaccines, taking evolving needs such as variants and boosters, as long as long-term market shaping needs into account, very much remaining committed to the goal of equitable access and making sure that we use our supply best directed to support equitable access. Next slide. And then beyond the sort of short and medium term priorities, also important to think about investing in the preparedness for future pandemics. So investing in the expansion of regional capacity is another focus of the manufacturing task force. And at Gavi, we are focused on the key questions of sustainability and looking at what business models will both serve our needs during and between pandemics. And so lastly, just to close in terms of as we think for kovacs on how we pursue our goal for equitable access, if I can have the last slide, please. We are only going to be as successful as the support that we get and the alignment in terms of purpose and the partnership with all of you in the virtual room. So to deliver on our ambitious goals to the end of 2021 and then in 2022, we are looking for help in many forms. Further investments in global supply, prioritization of the needs of those countries that are still behind and the most behind, looking at investments in preparing delivery programs, and also striving for transparency of information so that we can really make sure that we have the most productive collaboration and make the best use of the very scarce resource that are the COVID-19 vaccines. So with that, thank you so much for your time and attention. Back to you, Rajinder.
Thank you very much, Aurelia. This was a scintillating overview of what kovacs has done in spite of all the challenges that you have faced in the last several months and various supply disruptions. But in spite of that, allocating over 818 million doses and supplying 371 million doses, I think is a Herculean task. So congratulations for that. And also for overshooting the funding budget of 9.3 billion by more than 10%. And I think what is great is that you already have 11 vaccines committing 1.43 billion doses for the coming period. And as you rightly pointed out, that the dose sharing and donation itself is going to contribute to more than 1 billion doses in the next few months, put together with 22, out of which 400 million are going to be available within the next 2 months, which is a great news. And I think your focus on expanding regional capacities, sustainabilities, business models of Gavi with vaccine manufacturers, and to ensure the equitable access is definitely going to go a long way in making sure that this vaccine equity gap is bridged very quickly. So thank you very much once again, Aurelia. And as we have been saying right in the beginning, that the focus of this AGM has been on Africa. And I'm very happy to see that Dr. John Nikengasong, Director Africa CDC, is already here with us on the panel. So may I request Dr. John to kindly take the floor.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you absolutely clear.
Wonderful, this is great. Let me first of all start by congratulating the organizers for such an excellent meeting, and it's good to see a whole broad spectrum of colleagues here, both from countries that are making remarkable progress in achieving high targets in vaccinations, and those from countries that are still challenged. I think, Carissa, good to see you live. I mean, you and I shared a podium at the Vatican meeting just a few weeks ago. And I start with that because of the remarkable challenge that we face as a region. And where, if you step back and you look at the different introductions of vaccines into the countries that did remarkably well are countries that had vaccine production facilities. Very clearly, the UK, the USA, and others, of course, China, Russia. And then you have the second level of countries that had the money to buy vaccines quickly, the Canadas and others. And then you progressively move to the countries that, or the kovacs mechanism that our colleagues just brilliantly explained. I mean, if you look at that, it was how we got vaccines was a function of whether you produce vaccines or not. So I start there because the conversation we are having here today is critical to, I would say that it is truly a security issue and to some point a national security issue to have access, be able to produce vaccines. If you look at the region of Africa as a whole, as we speak, over the years, Africa has imported 99% of its vaccines and produced only 1% of the vaccines. This is a region of 1.2 billion people. So that paradigm, I'm very happy that there's no divergence of view there, that we have to have a regional capacity for vaccine manufacturing, that this is clearly part of the global health security architecture. That one of the lessons that should emerge from this pandemic early on, and I would underline the word early lessons, is that global health security starts at national level, and national health security depends on regional health security, and regional health security, if well done, will fit into the global health security agenda. I think that is one early lesson there. The second thing that we're all learning is that when commonly challenged, and when people tend to look inward, and forgetting to know that we are more connected than we thought we were, and that the inequities that we knew existed are even further, the gaps in inequity are further than what we thought. And the vulnerabilities are very common, regardless of whether we are in countries that have or do not have. So I think it has been, we have been having discussion, and I'm happy that most of you have been participating in the regional dialogues that we have been having, including, I see here, Thomas and others. We've really, really good dialogue, and there's never been a moment that has lent itself an opportunity, as this is now for Africa, to work with all of you and to engage in the journey of vaccine manufacturing. You all recall that on, I think it was April 12 and 13, we hosted as African Union and Africa CDC an extraordinary summit, which I'll characterize as a historic summit, where it brought together in 2 days, to our greatest surprise, and happily surprised us so, about 40,000 people came on board on that platform to discuss the need for vaccine manufacturing in Africa as part of strengthening health defenses or regional health security, which automatically fits into the overall global health security. At that meeting, it was very clear that countries were eager to move forward. And as we speak, fast forward, I'm very pleased that about 10 or 11 countries have now raised their hands up and say, look, we are ready to engage in the journey of vaccine manufacturing on the continent. That is very much welcome news. I see William is on this platform. William, Ghana is part of that. There are many other countries in Africa now, about 11 of them, as I indicated there. So where do we go from here? I think as a continent, we need a coordinated approach. We need a coordinated approach that will speak to the need to define the ecosystem for vaccine manufacturing, and also have a framework on how that would define how we move from importing 99% of vaccines to manufacturing about 60% of our vaccines in the next 25 years or so. If the continent do not engage in that journey, I mean, we will continue to put ourselves at risk, and we will continue to undermine our own health security and economic security. The vaccines, unfortunately, COVID vaccines, unfortunately, have become a very serious geopolitical issue, has also become a very important health diplomacy, and I use health diplomacy in quote unquote, element, which as a continent and the AU, we take an exception on that. We take an exception on that because we are saying that in order to get to our 60% target of immunization, which the head of states endorsed on August 20th last year, we ought to be able to have at least 1.6 billion doses of vaccines that will be able to immunize about 800 million people from this year to next year. So our definition of vaccine diplomacy is any efforts that enable us to get to the 1.6 billion doses of vaccines between this year and next year. We are very encouraged that the WHO now says we need to get to 70%. We stated that target of 60% last year, and we're happy to adjust our target to 70% vaccination. So the continent as a whole is not just waiting for vaccines to be donated. The continent is doing what I'll describe as a historic effort, where we've come together and established the African Vaccine Acquisition Task Team, commonly called AVAT, where through that mechanism, we've secured 400 million doses of vaccines. And these are paid by member states' treasury or supported by funding from the World Bank. So that is historic. And if we combine that effort, which will enable us to immunize about 31% of our population, together with what kovacs is promising to deliver, then we're making good progress. I think that is very, very important. Otherwise, the whole discussion about vaccine diplomacy, where you probably give 200,000 doses of vaccines to country X, 150,000 to country Y, only helps to divide us. And it doesn't allow us to actually have a coherent vaccination efforts in the region. I think We are very firm on that. It's a position that we've taken very deliberately, that we should really define step back and not confuse the issues with a so-called discussion about health diplomacy, but rather look at public health, a strategy, a target, indicators that will enable us to get to 1.6 billion doses of vaccines if we need to get our 800 million people immunized on the continent. We're making progress. We hope that as part of AVAD, by the end of November, we would have been able to deliver 35 million doses of vaccines as part of our own efforts there. So I think, let me just conclude by saying that the time is now for the continent and in partnership with all of you to strengthen its vaccine manufacturing efforts. But it has to be done in a coordinated fashion. It has to be done in a way that we create an ecosystem and a framework that it doesn't offer itself or lend itself for a zero-sum game approach where a certain country manufactures vaccines on the continent and someone else do not manufacture. We also need to look at the market side of the equation and look at collectively how do we redesign the market so that countries that are engaged in manufacturing vaccines will actually have their own the fair share of the market for vaccines, because there's no point manufacturing a vaccine if there will be no demand for the vaccines or uptake of the vaccines in terms of purchase. So again, let me conclude by thanking the organizers for offering me the opportunity to share my reflections with all of you. And I look forward to an entertaining and very productive discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John, for sharing your thoughts, very valuable inputs, because as you rightly pointed out, it is not the question of manufacturing of vaccines, but it is a question of national and regional security, which is important, which contributes to the global health security. So I think you would have appreciated that as far as DCVMN is concerned today, the whole focus of this AGM is Africa and how best to collaborate, cooperate, and coexist to make sure that we are able to make Africa quite independent as far as the vaccine manufacturing is concerned. So we would be very happy to go further on this with our members. And it is very happy to understand that already you have 10 to 11 countries who are ready to engage for the manufacturing. So thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. And with this, I would also like to take this opportunity to welcome Mr. Thomas Cuny, Director General IFPMA, because we wanted to listen to the success story of the industry, and I don't think there is a better person than Mr. Thomas Cuny to share those thoughts and realities and facts with all of us. So welcome, Mr. Thomas, for this session. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Rajinder. And let me say first how honored and pleased I am to be invited to speak at your annual General Assembly, because what we have seen over the last, I think, 20 months is an unprecedented collaboration between everyone involved in the fight against COVID-19, innovative manufacturers, biotech manufacturers, and manufacturers from developing country, the vaccine manufacturers network. And I think we can be proud of where we are, because in the midst of this pandemic, you did ask me to talk about the success of the vaccine industry, but Rajinder, since you know me quite well, I do hope that you don't mind me also addressing not just the successes, but the shortcomings of what we have done over the last 20 months. Now, I do recall in spring last year, I was once interviewed by CNN together with Kate O'Brien from WHO, and she was asked, when do you expect the first COVID-19 vaccine to reach people? And she said, if all goes well, June 21, and I've never seen all going well and smooth in vaccine development and manufacturing. As you know, we did see the first vaccines reach people in December. We did see actually the first vaccines reaching people in Africa within 38 days or after 38 days after the WHO emergency use approval. Therefore, clearly, we have seen unprecedented development at record speed, which would not have been possible if everybody would have done business as usual. I think we saw collaboration between academia, startups, big pharma, developing country vaccine manufacturers, and also big contributions from regulators around the world, and big also call out here to the regulatory system of WHO. I'm very pleased to have Mariangela Shima after me, because WHO, when I look at the vaccine issue, has also contributed to us being where we are. But also in terms of challenges, setbacks, we have seen 3 of the 4 biggest innovative vaccine manufacturers have not been able to come up with the COVID-19 vaccine by now. That was a surprise for many, but we have seen others whom people didn't expect succeed, and we are lucky that we had them succeed. We have seen setbacks in terms of scaling up manufacturing. Anybody who says vaccine manufacturing, it's just easy and we could be far beyond where we are now, I think doesn't know about the complexity of vaccine manufacturing. We have seen some of the most seasoned, experienced vaccine manufacturing, not just challenged by shortage of raw materials, by supply chain problem because of export restrictions, but also challenged by lack of skilled worker, by problems encountered nobody expected, and that has been a setback for, among others, kovacs. And I was very pleased to listen to Seth Barkley in the opening session, now to Aurelia, because I do believe that kovacs has been a big success. And I do believe, when I look over into the future for the next 6 months, scaling up from a little bit less than 400 million doses shared by kovacs delivered to countries in need, to 2.6 billion expected by the end of March next year. I think that is no small achievement. We have seen industry from developing country vaccine manufacturers and from industrialized country vaccine manufacturers, notwithstanding the setbacks, the challenges, able to scale up on an unprecedented scale. Pre-COVID-19, we knew that global vaccine capacity, excluding seasonal flu vaccination, was about 3.5 billion vaccines manufactured. This year, by the end of October, we will have 9.3 billion COVID-19 vaccines alone manufactured. By the end of the year, more than 12 billion, which means more than a trebling of pre-pandemic global vaccine capacity. And everybody expects by mid next year, we may see 24 billion vaccines manufactured, by which time, hopefully and most likely, supply will outstrip demand. Now, having mentioned this success, it would not have been possible without a non-precedented number of collaborations. We have more than 300 collaborations signed around the world between big pharma companies with biotech companies, big pharma and biotech companies with developing country vaccine manufacturers. We have seen players whose vaccines failed so far offer their infrastructure, their capacity to others, and almost 300 of those involve technology transfer. I do recall something which Sai Prasad and Rajendra Suri mentioned when we organized the Chatham House Roundtable to express our concerns and address the issue of supply chain bottlenecks and scaling up vaccine manufacture with Chatham House earlier this year, that it is crucially important and should not be underestimated that each vaccine manufacturer looking for collaborations, looking for tech transfer, must carefully check the checklist in terms of the capability, the quality assurance, the skilled workers, the infrastructure, and everything ready of those with whom they entered into collaboration. Because at the end of the day, if something will go wrong, the licensor will be blamed for it. And therefore it is important. And we have seen that this is happening on a large scale and an unprecedented scale. But we also have to admit that there is one area where we utterly failed. We did better than in HIV/AIDS, where it took 10 years for the HIV medicines to reach Africa, 10 years, 38 days now. But when you look at the vaccine equity, I think we all need to be ashamed that the world hasn't done better. We all are embarrassed that, for example, Africa is discriminated again. And we have from our side called out in May for a 5-step plan to increase, to rich countries to increase dose sharing, for optimizing capacity, for tackling trade barriers, for continuing to innovate, but also work on country readiness. But having said that, I do push back when people say this is a question of rich versus poor, of North versus South, because when you look at the world in data and the numbers, the 2 billion vaccine jabs have been administered in China, 1 billion in India, 400 million in the US. Therefore, this is a problem where all of us must feel ashamed, all of us must try to do better in future pandemics. We have heard from Dr. John Nkengasong about the importance of actually engaging in capacity building, in building up infrastructure in Africa. Many of our companies, and I myself, I've been at the summit mentioned by Dr. John. I'm involved in the roundtable, for example, hosted by the government of Germany. I do believe and see and very proud that there's a serious commitment from companies to make sure that Africa will be better served. Nobody really talks much about Latin America, but having heard Dr. Etienne earlier, actually Latin America doesn't have that much local manufacturing capacity either. Therefore, we need to look beyond what we have now, because let's not deceive ourselves. We have seen vaccine nationalism of the worst kind. I would not bet myself that politicians in need of being re-elected will just be, in solidarity with global needs. I think we need to have an infrastructure. We need to prepare that in the future, in the next pandemic, Africa as well as Latin America, all of us are really fully committed to delivering better on vaccine equity. At the same time, I want to conclude with that. Let me be crystal clear. One of the reasons why we saw the record, development of a vaccine within 326 days rather than 4 years of the vaccine against Ebola, the unprecedented scale up, the collaborations was a strong innovation ecosystem. And therefore, when we talk about future pandemic preparedness, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's not undermine this strong innovation ecosystem. Also, we need to make sure that also in the future we have immediate, unhindered access to pathogens. And I'm extremely worried about the discussion on, but you need to create a new system. There needs to be Nagoya access benefit sharing, because for God's sake, when I look at where the pathogens come from, I think the best we can offer is really helping out that vaccines and treatments are developed fast, and that we are fully committed to do better on equitable access to these vaccines or treatments. But let me close by really thanking Rajinder Suri and Sai Prasad and the whole of the DCVMN network for the amazing collaboration, the amazing openness which we have seen as partners of ACT-A, as partners in kovacs. And I think we need to continue work to help kovacs be the success everybody wants it to be. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas. This was very, very encouraging, very helpful. Of course, you were able to highlight the challenges that the industry has been facing, as also giving a very clear hope, signal of hope that, one second, that we are able to produce more than 12 billion in 2021 and doubling that capacity in next year. So, and of course, the focus on various innovations and also the collaboration that you have highlighted is definitely a point which has been taken very, very seriously. So thank you very much once again, Thomas, for a very nice and a detailed description. And with this, I would like to invite Dr. Mariangela Simao, Assistant Director General, Access to Medicines and Health Products, WHO, Vaccine Allocation and Vaccine Equity, basically the challenges and lessons learned. So over to you, Dr. Simao, for the regulatory mechanisms and flexibilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Suri, and thank you, DCVMN, for the invitation to speak on this panel. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. And I think enough was said about the record time, and then from the regulatory perspective, we have 11 months now, right? 11 months since the first vaccine was approved for emergency use in the US and the UK. And we are where we are, right? With almost 6.7 billion doses being used so far. And also with, I don't think we ever have almost 20 million doses being administered every day globally, right? But this, of course, hides any big numbers. They hide the extremes, right? And high and upper middle income countries have used 75% of all vaccines produced so far. And John has already mentioned why in continents like Africa, we end up having less than 5% of the people fully vaccinated. And yeah, you know, I worked on access to medicines and health products for many, many years now, having a large experience on HIV. And now, as we face this pandemic, I hear many people say that inequities in access to medicines and vaccines existed before the pandemic and will persist until the end of time. But I'm always saying that we should not conform to what is the usual normal, or this is the way the world is and we cannot change it, right? I think Thomas, when he just mentioned that this is definitely not business as usual. We all agree with that. But in reality, we do see business as usual. We do need to significantly change the way we address access challenges, because not only we are facing a global crisis, and these numbers, like I said, hide a massive inequity, which is wrong from an ethical perspective. But it's also self-defeating, because we can't end this pandemic by over-vaccinating certain populations while under-vaccinating many more, right? And now let's say we have an estimated global production, theoretically, at around 1.5 billion doses per month. We can say there is enough supply to achieve the targets, the WHO global targets of vaccinating 40% of the population in every country by the end of this year, and 70% by the middle of next year, provided they are distributed equitably. And when we look at these numbers, you know, people vaccinated, we can't say we don't have a supply problem. We do have an equitable allocation problem. So what we do have, like kovacs has contracts in place for next year, up to 5 billion doses, I think, but it's critical that these doses go where they are most needed, which are countries in lower vaccination coverage, with priority given to older people, health workers, and other at-risk groups. Talking a little bit about the allocation, you know, that WHO and Gavi managed together. Aurelia and I actually are the coordinators of this process. We do manage the global vaccine allocation mechanism, which initially ran allocation rounds based on proportional participation in the kovacs facility, so that all countries could receive doses this year. And then now for Q4, with many countries lagging behind in coverage, we have moved to prioritize allocation of doses to countries with lower coverage from all sources, considering also that we need their efforts needed to increase absorption capacity, was already mentioned before me, and to manage the logistic constraints like the ultra cold chain requirements, very difficult to manage, or the availability of syringes, especially 0.3 syringes. So this all has to be managed. With this, that said, we did an allocation round 7 now for October, dedicated to countries with coverage below 15% from all coverages. all sources. And we have just run the allocations round 8 and 9, where we also reserve 50% of the doses to countries, to participants that are below 20% coverage from all sources and 50% to all participants below 20%, only with COVAX coverage. But COVAX, and I must say also AVAX, we can only deliver when we receive supplies that are contracted with manufacturers in a predictable manner. We can only achieve these global targets if countries and companies that control vaccine supply, because there are both, right? There are companies, the industry, and there are countries who have contracted. If these countries and companies do put the contracts for COVAX and for AVAX first for delivery and also for donated doses, and the DG, WDG has recently called all countries on the side of preparedness, right, on absorptive capacity. We have called on all countries to update the national vaccine targets and plans and to ensure they have the capacities in place to use all doses as rapidly and efficiently as possible. But many developing countries need the support of the development banks to be able to access more rapidly funds to support vaccine delivery programs. We already have some progress in this manner, in this side. But we also do need the vaccine manufacturers, and we have been discussing this with Thomas more than once with IFPNA and individual manufacturers to prioritize and fulfill the contracts with COVAX and also AVAX as a matter of urgency. Also to be more transparent about what is going where, what vaccines are going where, and also to share know-how and non-exclusive license to enable all regions to increase manufacturing capacity. Aurelia already mentioned the manufacturing initiative inside COVAX. We also want countries with high vaccine coverage to continue to increase swap delivery schedules with COVAX and AVAX, but also to fulfill their dose sharing pledges immediately. And more than ever, I think it's very actual, very current. We need the vaccine producing countries not to have export bans, right? To allow free cross-border flow of finished vaccines and drug substance and everything else. I would like to end by thanking the DCVMN for your leadership, Rajinder, for Cyprus leadership, and for your efforts to ensure the equitable access to vaccines becomes a reality rather sooner than later. And thank you all, and I wish you an excellent event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mariangelo. It was, the messages have been taken very loud and clear. What you are saying about the, the supply was not an issue, but it is the equitable distribution which became a problem. And the other thing which I think is important to note is that what you are basically advising us manufacturers are to give a predictable supply position to the COVAX and also prioritize COVAX supplies and be transparent in whatever we are doing, wherever we are supplying, so that there is an equitable, not only supply, but equitable distribution. And further, I think the countries are taking your advice in terms of not to have export bans. So these are pieces of advice which I think are very, very critical, very important to make sure that the whole world is vaccinated fully and we reach the targets of 40% by end of this year and 70% by the end of next year. So thank you very much, Dr. Mariangelo. And with these few words, I would like to invite Dr. Michelle McMurray, President and CEO of Bioinnovation, for addressing the audience. Michelle, floor is yours.
Oh, thank you so much, Rajinder. It's a pleasure to join you all. I appreciate you and the Developing Countries Vaccine Manufacturers Network for inviting Bio to share our perspective. Bio represents over 1,000 biotechnology companies in 30 countries. We're the world's largest biotech advocacy group, and our companies represent both some of the biggest biopharma companies, as well as the small and emerging companies. And it's important to remember that many of our smaller and emerging companies perhaps will have no revenue or no products on the market, similar to what Moderna or BioNTech was 1 or 2 years ago, but they're taking big risks in order to produce the innovations that save lives. And innovation by biotech companies will continue to be vital as we control this pandemic and future ones as well. As we heard from Thomas, the biopharmaceutical industry is currently producing COVID vaccines in record time. And since January of 2020, our industry has launched more than 1,000 COVID vaccine therapeutic and diagnostic research and development programs. That's 1,000 programs that have been started to try to find new cures and interventions for COVID. Many of these were started by small companies stepping forward to try to make a difference in society's time of need. And to date, our industry has forged over 300 manufacturing partnerships to help produce and distribute some of the successful vaccines that have come out of that pipeline. There have been many industry partnerships that have paired ample resources with unique research and technology. I mentioned BioNTech's partnership with Pfizer, Novavax, and the Serum Institute of India, Bharat Biotech, and Oncogen, just to name a few. And moreover, there are additional global projects announced by individual companies, such as Moderna's plan to build a vaccine manufacturing facility in Africa. So overall, this has been a global effort. Novel vaccines and products are being developed all over the world, from India and China to the US and Europe, and companies are really working together with governments and NGOs to fight this pandemic. Cross-border collaboration was critical in supporting the development and production of vaccines, and when there were bottlenecks, and as there continue to be bottlenecks, such as in sharing critical raw ingredients or pathogenic data, we work together to try to reduce some of those restrictions and share materials where possible. But COVID will not be the last pandemic, unfortunately. Viruses mutate and evolve, and so must society. The world is already incredibly familiar with coronaviruses, not to mention other pathogens, and these diseases will be able to spread as humans travel more frequently and push into new environments. So therefore, we must apply the lessons we're currently learning from the fight against COVID-19 to the battle against pandemics yet to come. And we all know that pandemic preparedness talks that are occurring at the WHO in Geneva are very important, and bio supports these vital discussions. So while scientists and policymakers are still learning new lessons every day, there are some certainties that we need to inform our future path. First, a strong innovation ecosystem is needed to fight any pandemic. Scientists can develop models and survey populations looking for threats for tomorrow. They can help build the technology and platforms that can be adapted as new risks are identified. But we can never be sure what pathogen will be unleashed or how to cure it. And that's why we must empower innovators who can efficiently develop and produce vaccines and other treatments. And that means protecting things like intellectual property and R&D incentives that really help our companies identify that critical, vital early stage investment to take those new emerging great ideas like mRNA and turn them into products that actually help patients. This means providing funding for risk-taking research and smoothing pathways from those initial ideas to finished products for patients. It means investing in sustainable manufacturing around the world, not just in a handful of countries, and forging new development and manufacturing partnerships so that the entire globe is engaged in this process. And as Thomas outlined and Bio stated in our Global Share Program initiative, it means removing bottlenecks in getting critical raw ingredients from point A to point B to allow for timely production. And that's going to take reducing export restrictions and problematic national mechanisms that can slow the availability of those key inputs. Important organizations like CEPI, the World Health Organization, and the World Trade Organization are all critical in meeting these goals, and they'll also be incredibly important in proactively building a stronger infrastructure as we go forward to better distribute these current vaccines, but also novel vaccines and treatments moving forward. while leaders like doctors Berkeley, Hatchett, and Swaminathan realized early on the challenges of equitably distributing COVID vaccines, we didn't have a tested global mechanism in place to adequately share doses. So with good intentions, we've built systems on the fly. And BIO shares the belief that we must develop a stronger system for the fair and equitable allocation and distribution of pandemic medicines and vaccines before any future crisis and to end this current crisis. So any preparedness framework or treaty, however, needs to recognize one of the strengths of our current system and how quickly that system was able to respond to COVID and avoid jeopardizing that level of response moving forward. And that's why BIO believes that pandemic discussions should really focus on ensuring that vaccine access and sharing mechanisms do not hinder or delay access to pathogens or genetic data. One of the key lessons from the COVID pandemic is that a quick response is critical. And every day, especially early in a pandemic, it's precious. So delays can have a disastrous impact and cost lives, as we've seen. So lastly, plans must ensure that global access to medical countermeasures do not also serve as a tax against industry or jeopardize vital intellectual property or incentives. After all, it was the international network of intellectual property protection that made much of the risk-taking and cross-border collaboration that we saw as critical in COVID possible. So in the initial days of COVID-19, the phrase, "we're all in this together," was used often. And it was quickly clear, however, that some people faced greater challenges than others. So yet, while we are still all in this together, the biopharmaceutical industry is incredibly important in making sure that we work together to get solutions to patients. We've responded in record time with record production, although much more is needed. And our industry, working with other entities, will be vital in fighting against the next pandemic as well. So when we lead with our innovators, when we put the maximum number of shots on goal, we get ahead of the game and we save lives. So I urge us to remember that as we make plans to defeat any future pandemic in all corners of the globe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Very, very worthy comments. And we fully subscribe to what you are suggesting and advising. And I think the innovation model has to be in place, funding the research and innovation, innovative, sustainable manufacturing, as well as removing bottlenecks and protecting IP are going to be some of the key messages that you are delivering. So thank you very much. And with this, I would like to now invite Dr. Jerome Kim, Director General, IVI, for his talk on actions taken toward developing accessible vaccines. Dr. Jerome Kim, please.
Thank you very much to the DCVMN for the opportunity to speak today. I hope you can hear me. I'm actually in not in an ideal location.
We can hear you.
Thank you. Could you put the slides up, please? I want to thank the DCVMN for the opportunity to speak at this annual general meeting and after the very distinguished panel and the very interesting and important comments that were made. It'll actually simplify and in some cases amplify the messages that I have on my slides. Next slide, please. These are my disclosures. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. There's no question that we've moved with unprecedented speed in the development of the current wave of vaccines and then the wave 1A or the second wave of vaccines, some of the data from which are being released now, and that a third wave or wave 2, according to this table, is also being prepared, and we should expect results from those vaccines as well. There has been good news about safe and efficacious vaccines in as many of the speakers said, in a remarkably short period of time. Next slide, please. Again, please. And again, many of the speakers have commented on the ability of the vaccine manufacturing industry, and we have to thank the developing country vaccine manufacturers for their enormous contribution to the COVID-19 vaccine manufacturing system. We estimate that a significant number of doses will be available by 2022 and in 2023. Next slide, please. Sorry, next slide, please. And advance one more time, please. But in October 2021, we are here. And what you see here is the number of vaccine doses administered per 100 people. About 50% of the world has received at least one dose of vaccine. 6.6 billion doses have been given so far. But again, and you only have to look at the map to see that there are parts of this world where not enough vaccine has been given, where in fact in low-income countries, only 2.7% of the population has received their first dose. Next slide, please. Sorry, next slide, please. And Aurelia has already described kovacs and described it far better than I could have ever. Kovacs was a bridge to near concurrent access. You heard the projections. You've seen that kovacs is working. The answer to the question, was kovacs a bridge too far, is no. It is not a bridge too far. It is something that is too important to fail. It's too important to fail not only for COVID-19, but because it represents a model that we can apply to other vaccines, many of which have implications for global health. So far, COVAX is distributed, and you've seen this before, 365 million doses to 144 countries. These are Gavi data. But 85% of those doses have been used by high and upper middle income countries. And a failure of equity had 3 predictable consequences. And we are living that right now through those predictable consequences. The first was a humanitarian crisis. It was projected in mid-2020 that without equity in the distribution of the first 2 billion doses of COVID-19 deaths, global COVID deaths would double. Now, we were at about 1 million deaths back then, and we are at 4 million now. So we are living out the worst case prediction from the failure of the ability to provide vaccines to populations that need them badly. The second consequence was an economic consequence. And again, this is modeling from the National Board of Economics Review, the Brookings Institute, and actually the Office of National Intelligence, which is a part of the White House. And they predicted that without equity, 50% of global economic costs of the pandemic in 2021, that is $4 to $5 trillion, would be borne by the advanced economies, by the high income countries. And again, at the end of 2021, we're seeing the consequences and confusion of failure to vaccinate people, not only in low and middle income countries, but a failure to vaccinate systematically in high income countries. And finally, and this is the thing that I as a virologist find most worrisome, it's the biological consequence. Failure to control the pandemic, to use the vaccine systematically in populations, will generate mutants that may undermine the efficacy of the current vaccines and may undermine the efficacy of vaccines in the future. The cycle of transmission needs to be broken. We know that outbreaks generate variants and that variants generate outbreaks, and we need to break that cycle. And how are we going to do that? By engaging the innovation, the manufacturing skills, and the ability of the world to distribute and deliver those 16 billion doses of vaccine. Next slide, please. And just to remind us all, vaccine access hasn't been fair, and it's never been fair. This is rotavirus. Rotavirus vaccine was approved by the US FDA in 2006. It was recommended by WHO in 2009. In 2021, 60% of the world's children have not received 3 doses of rotavirus vaccine. So COVAX represents an enormous advance. It represents a commitment on the part of people around the world to deliver vaccine in a timely manner. And that is critical. I show the DTP coverage in the US in 1980 was 96%. You can see global DTP3 coverage from 1980 to 2016. Again, this coverage gap is longstanding and takes decades to correct. And COVAX promises to be the means that we have now to get vaccine technology out to people who need it as quickly as possible. So we need to work hard to ensure that COVAX or the follow-on to COVAX is successful and that it can be applied to other vaccines for global health. Next slide, please. And one more. Vaccine manufacturers have really done a remarkable job. And when you look at the globalization of vaccine manufacturing, this was mentioned again previously, although the big vaccine manufacturers, except for Pfizer, maybe, have not been successful yet in bringing COVID-19 vaccines onto the scene. And actually, sorry, could you advance one slide? They have been successful in working together to manufacture billions of doses of vaccine, 1.5 billion doses a month. And they've distributed manufacturing in various forms. And actually the slide that was shown previously by Aurelia showed it much better around the world. You can see here the distribution of manufacturing for Oxford AstraZeneca, for the Pfizer BioNTech, for Sinovac, the Chinese company, and for Novavax, distributed all over the world. And it's that kind of cooperation, those kinds of contract manufacturing and licensing agreements that are going to be necessary for the next increment. And what do I mean by that? If we think about variant vaccines or bivalent vaccines, or even hopefully at some point a universal COVID vaccine, we are talking about increments of 8 billion doses. So we're going to need to maintain these manufacturing networks. And we're also going to have to learn from the past and ensure that things like logistics and supply of critical reagents are not going to be restricted. Next slide, please. And advance one more, please. So this is my final slide. We know that the manufacturers have contracted or licensed out hundreds of millions of doses to other manufacturers capable of making high-quality vaccines. Critical in this, and as we think about moving vaccine manufacturing around the world, are regulatory authorities that are able to review manufacturers' quality, review the quality of clinical trials, and make determinations about whether vaccines that are brought forward for approval can be approved. If it means strengthening regulatory authorities around the world, and there is a developing countries vaccine regulators network, then we have to do that as well as we think about the question of regional vaccine manufacturing. The second, and others have addressed this as well, is the importance of local and/or regional manufacturing. But in particular, are those timelines consistent with what we need for the immediate, the intermediate, or the long-term provision of vaccines for global health or for COVID-19 in particular? Importantly, what sustainability plans are going to be put into place in order to ensure that these vaccine manufacturers that are regional are able to find buyers for their vaccines? How can we work to help them with a business case, as well as providing the know-how, the technology transfer, the important technical capability to be able to manufacture the vaccine? We also have to make sure that these regional efforts are given a sustainable model that will allow them to function in the next pandemic. Technology transfer is very important, and IVI as an organization believes very strongly in technology transfer. We have participated in technology transfer to 7 different companies, developing country manufacturers. It's very important, but it's something that takes time, and it's something that we can't do necessarily at the drop of a hat. This is something that requires planning, it requires agreements, it requires training and confirmation, And it also requires that the product that comes out in the end be evaluable by regulatory authorities that are capable of assessing the product, assessing the manufacturer, and hopefully of referring that product to the World Health Organization so that that product can be available for global health. Global supply chain bottlenecks have been discussed by other people and remain a problem. Intellectual property issues, again, I think others have talked about this. It goes hand in hand with technology transfer, but I think that most of the people in the room understand that it isn't only the intellectual property, it isn't the patent, it's the process. And the process is something that is a stack of SOPs, or now an electronic transfer of large volumes of information, and working with organizations to ensure that when the technology is transferred, the ability to manufacture it at high quality is also transferred. We haven't really talked about the importance of implementation of vaccination, but I think that as we go from vaccinating the 130 million children in the global birth cohort to 8 billion people around the world, we're going to have to make sure that we strengthen health systems to be able to deliver those vaccines, that we strengthen surveillance systems so that we know where outbreaks are present and where new vaccine, or maybe the variant vaccine, needs to be deployed as quickly as possible, again, to limit spread. Because I think most of us understand that this is not going to be over.
You will have to wrap up, please.
All right, thank you. All right, finally, vaccine adverse reporting systems. So I guess I can finish by saying, have we done enough today to be ready for a long pandemic? Because I think that we understand that this pandemic will be something that is going on for some period of time. And then have we learned enough to prevent the next pandemic? And that next pandemic could happen in another 100 years, or it could be the impending epidemic of antimicrobial resistance, for which additional vaccines will be necessary. But we need to be ready the next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jerome, for this very, very scintillating presentation and in-depth analysis. Thank you very much. I will request now Professor William Mfofu, Chair, AVMI, to kindly give his keynote address. Professor William.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be part of this meeting for the Developing Countries Vaccine Manufacturing Network. The AVMI is very proud to participate in the annual general meeting. And we're very grateful for this opportunity to discuss our mission. And the AVMI has really was established in 2010. And our main focus is to promote the establishment of vaccine manufacturing in Africa. I'm sure everyone is aware that Africa produces less than 1% of the vaccines that it uses. And so the AVMI would like to ensure that Africa has the capacity to manufacture vaccines, to break the cycle of dependency that COVID has so brought to the fore. The AVMI came about because a group of Africans came together under a program that the World Health Organization and the US Department of Health had set up to transfer technology for workshops, set up technology transfer workshops to promote influenza vaccine manufacturing. And actually, this led to a group of people determined to form partnerships where we would advocate for the establishment of vaccine manufacturing in Africa. So fast forward to 2021, and we're very happy that the African Union Commission organized the first, big continental-wide conference on vaccine manufacturing in Africa. And you've heard already from Johnny Kengasong some of the very high-level activities that have been taking place. So the AVMI has been very, very active in the recent strategies. There are 6 working groups that have been set up. The information is available on the African CDC website. And we're working with various partners looking at, access to infrastructure, appropriate technology, the funding and financing requirements, the kind of market, the manpower skills that will be required to feed into this enterprise to establish vaccine manufacturing in Africa. We're well aware of the issues. I think some of the previous speakers have talked on some of the strategies, the innovations in technology, the need for access to markets, of course, the need to produce vaccines that meet the quality standards. And so the AVMI is very, very happy that this opportunity that unfortunately the COVID pandemic has brought to us has really manifested the needs of Africa in terms of vaccine manufacturing. And we are very happy that this partnership with the DCVMN shows that the Africans do have, the willpower, as has been shown by the African CDC and the African Union Commission, to push forward to establish the necessary frameworks, to establish the necessary fundamentals and utilize the existing market mechanisms to promote vaccine manufacturing in Africa. This should be a sustainable effort. Vaccines are critical public health tools, and access to vaccines is not negotiable. We want to ensure the health security in our continent as well. And as vaccines are being rolled across our continent at a very slow pace, we are very sure that advocating strongly for vaccine manufacturing is the way to go. I think this session has illustrated the various aspects that need to be considered to push forward with vaccine manufacturing advocacy. And we're very glad that significant progress is being made. Some countries have taken this up at the national level. My own country, for example, we have the ECOWAS region moving forward with the tax team. We know that the other regions, WHO has set up vaccine manufacturing technology hubs to transfer technology. And of course, we know that the regulators are also working hard to push up the ability to regulate vaccines that will be made in Africa. The AVMI has done a lot of work in the past. We've done white papers on vaccine manufacturing in Africa, the basics. These have been published on our website. We continue to engage with various partners. And we're very happy that our recent work with the PAVM is establishing strategies and frameworks that will actually move us forward to do vaccine manufacturing in Africa. So again, thank you very much for this opportunity to showcase the need to establish vaccine manufacturing in Africa. These are very important steps that we have talked about for some time. And this opportunity now from the COVID pandemic is something that we must grasp and must push forward with. So we will work very closely with the African Union, with the Africa CDC, as John has explained, and we'll continue to push forward partnerships that will enable us to establish vaccine manufacturing, not just for pandemic vaccines, but eventually to cover the childhood immunization programs that will feed into the health security of our people in Africa. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Professor Amfo. It is fantastic to understand what initiatives AVMI is taking and the vision to make sure that Africa is self-sufficient in vaccine manufacturing. So with these few words, I would like to thank all the panelists and for their excellent deliberations and discussions today. The advice and the suggestions which have been given during the session, which we would definitely like to take forward. And thanking you all once again and requesting you to kindly join the other session, which is already on the CEO Forum Vision 2030 on the other link. So with these words, thanks again, everybody to participate and also the panelists to be on board. Thank you. Good day.